Yeah, of course. We're so excited to speak with you. And, legalizing psilocybin mushrooms is truly a Vanguard idea that we've really been excited to hear more about from someone that really knows what they're talking about. Would you mind
Yeah.
introducing yourself a little bit and explaining to our audience what the mission of the Decriminalize Nature D.C is?
Yeah, so I am Melissa Lavasani. I'm the chairwoman of Decriminalize Nature D.C. I'm also the proposer for Initiative 81, the Entheogenic Plant and Fungus Policy Act of 2020. It is a ballot initiative I submitted back in December of 2019, which decriminalizes naturally occurring psychedelics, entheogens, right? So, sorry, I have all sorts of notifications popping up on my computer right now. So yeah, we are a group of DC residents who have experienced tremendous healing from plant medicines, and we really see the potential in transforming our healthcare system. And this is a very essential first step that we're taking. I think a lot of us are in it for the long game, and we are taking this first step, and it's more symbolic than anything because, DC is an interesting place to have laws passed. Congress approves all of our laws and all our budgets. So we're really limited on what we can do, but we definitely do see a path forward in putting in full reform into the city, as well as escalating this issue up to the federal government.
I'm curious to know how open the average person in DC is to the concept of legalizing psychedelic therapy. Aside from the people who work on the Hill, who I'm sure are, already said in their own, opinion, whichever way they fall, but just the regular people who just kind of live and work in Washington, DC. How do they react when you approach them about this?
Well, I almost didn't do this campaign because I thought it was such a controversial issue. I had zero experience with psychedelics before I healed myself from really crazy depression and suicidal thoughts. And I assumed, I had my days in my 20s when I got all my partying out, and, this was just, psychedelics were never a thing I experimented with. But I did it on a whim. And then when we got our hands into the campaign and, I started to be out in the public more and more stories started to be written about me, people were reaching out to me being like, I didn't even know this was an option. Like, if I knew this, I could have, gotten off of antidepressants much sooner and healed myself. Or, can you talk to my sister-in-law who's dealing with this issue? Talk to my wife. I get emails like that all the time. And it's interesting because we did a poll back in, I think, February, and 10% of DC residents have tried psilocybin mushrooms. And I think that the national average is like 4 or 5%. So we're above the curve. But also we learned a lot during our signature drive that, we were having conversations with people. And I think that because the pharmaceutical industry has become this huge thing, and everyone is still sick all the time, even though our healthcare system is really advanced and we have all the technologies you could want and all sorts of money for research, like, we're all still sick. So I think people are starting to get fed up with this. And an idea like taking a psychedelic to heal an ailment that has no other real solid solution, it's not as crazy as an idea as you think it would be. People in DC are very politically liberal, but socially just a little bit more conservative. And I think that logically they can understand this. So you can justify taking something like this, because we all know pharmaceutical antidepressants don't really cure the problem. They just kind of numb everything down so you don't just feel much. And they don't make you feel human at all. So I think when you lead with the science and you say, that Johns Hopkins has this huge research unit that's having amazing results with psilocybin mushrooms, people hear that because, Johns Hopkins is in Baltimore, our next door neighbor, and they have a lot of credibility. And, that's our messaging is like, we're leading with the science. Like, this is not some crazy idea we just came up with. This is happening in real time, and the research is growing. So it's been overwhelmingly positive.
Can I ask you another slightly off-topic question? How many people bring up Joe Rogan when you introduce the topic of decriminalizing psilocybin mushrooms? I feel like the recent push in psychedelia has kind of taken a big push from podcasts. You see Joe Rogan, but also the more Silicon Valley type of business guys like Tim Ferriss have also been pushing for therapy through psychedelic mushrooms. I'm just curious if that's like where people are getting their information, if they have any.
I bring up Joe Rogan more than anything because I found out about mushrooms and, DMT. He talks about it all the time. He's a big psychedelic advocate. I don't think that Joe Rogan is a very big deal here. It's like it's kind of controversial here. I think there's a lot of progressive people here, but he's kind of been labeled as a conservative, which I constantly have to explain. It's like,
well, that's why I was curious, because typically drug legalization is something that you get from more liberal type people, but those two podcasters with a very large platform are more conservative, or at least typically associated with more conservative people, and they've been pushing this idea as well. So I wondered if that bred a little bit more bipartisanship in the reaction he got.
I think that he's more popular in other jurisdictions, not as much here. I definitely, like, the first time I brought him up in a meeting, I got a few eye rolls. And I was like, no, you guys, he's not. Like, I know he has conservative guests on, but he also has like the innovators and the people that are breaking boundaries in the psychedelic world. And that's like that is not a conservative issue. Like, they don't like this. So it's a constant educational.
Oh yeah, even here in Kansas City, we definitely get some eye rolls sometimes bringing up the likes of Joe Rogan. I mean, some people definitely like to think they're better or more woke or whatever. Something else I wanted to talk to you about. We talk about how people you point to the science a lot when it comes to psychedelic medicine. This is something that is backed up by recent scientific studies, but it's also backed up by years of human history. Psychedelic substances, including mushrooms and ayahuasca, have been, part of human history, medical practice, going back to ancient times. And psychedelics were an essential aspect of, the healing and shamanry in communities around the world, and definitely here in the American continents, parts of the sacred traditions and cultures of the indigenous peoples. How do you think that losing touch with these naturally occurring substances has altered our societal understanding and perception of not just medicine, but also each other and the world around us?
Right. And I mean, I think that's kind of one of the unintended benefits that I experienced with this. I grew up with, my parents are Iranian immigrants. My family was Muslim, but my parents didn't practice. I also went to Catholic school randomly. I'm not sure why they chose that. So I felt a lot of these pressures from religion, and it kind of turned me off to anything. And I just considered myself just a spiritual person, what everyone says. But and I've never used a psychedelic in a clinical setting at all. Like I microdosed at home, and I used it ceremoniously with an ayahuasca healer. So I think that is, to me, our connection with nature and our connection with nature is only a part of getting in touch with our true selves. I think that is more important than the science. I think because that's where the profound change is going to happen in our society, right? People continue to take entheogens and will become reconnected with themselves, become reconnected with their surroundings, their community around them, and want to, create some positive changes like it happened with me. But, it's hard when you're dealing with really type A DC people to talk about this as the lead argument. So you open with, Johns Hopkins has this amazing psychedelic research unit. Oh, and by the way, there is a very long history that goes back thousands and thousands of years of all sorts of indigenous people from all around the world that have been using these in a ceremonious manner with very little issue, right? This is a part of their culture. And, when you got to know your audience and who you're talking to. And I think leading with that makes you sound a little bit too much of a hippie, really. But it's definitely an important part of this. I've never felt more confident in my own beliefs and like how I treat people and the compassion I have for other people. I've never felt like this. And I do believe I attribute it to my use of psychedelics.
Yeah, and I think that, making the case for legalization, at least to a type A personality, you could easily point to the fact that drugs are largely illegal. At least the argument presented is because of they're addictive. But anybody who's taken a psychedelic drug can tell you the last thing you want to do the morning after you wake up taking something like psilocybin is doing it all over again. You know what I mean? You need a long period of time to reflect and digest what's happened to you. It's not something that you're going to want to do again and again and again and again, compulsively throughout the day.
Right. It's
you know,
not an escape. You're definitely like facing all of your bullshit is put right in front of you, and you've got to deal with all of it right then and there. And that's not an easy thing to do. A lot of people ask me what ayahuasca is like because it's not as commonly used as psilocybin. And I am pretty open. It's painful emotionally, physically. You're vomiting, you got diarrhea. Like it's not a pleasant experience, but the relief that you feel afterwards, like you just had 10 years of therapy in one night. And that continues. The benefits of it continue for like months and months and months. Like my last ceremony I participated in was right before the shutdown in end of February.
Good timing.
And perfect timing, right? I think that was intentional to get me in through this next phase of this campaign. But I'm still learning lessons from that. I feel like I'm still learning lessons from my very first session. And I think until you experience something like that, it's really hard to explain. So yeah, it's extremely profound, and it's hard. This is not easy work. If somebody doesn't have a point of reference for this, I think that people still think that if you make drugs illegal, people will stop doing drugs. But like, we need to start shifting from what people are doing in society to why people are doing these things in society, and I see, like, I know I talked about our healthcare system transforming, but I really think our prison system can transform, and criminal justice will, all of these things are tied together, and we can truly get back to our center with psychedelics.
When it comes to psychedelic mushrooms and criminal justice, people always talk about cannabis and the illegality of that, as well as, crack and cocaine. We hear less about psychedelic substances and people being locked up for them, but it's definitely still happening. Just from a freedom perspective, and we live in a supposedly free country. Can you talk about mushrooms, psychedelic drugs, and their relation to criminal justice, and why it's ridiculous that anyone is facing criminal charges for simply using a plant?
I mean, I think it was arbitrary. I think that Nixon needed to quiet certain groups, and one of the groups was the anti-war movement, which happened to be people that like to take psychedelics. They could have been doing anything, and that would have been the thing that would have been like crazy and illegal. So that's just like that was just like a crazy propaganda campaign, and that was a way to control society and get Nixon to, quiet all of his opposers. And, like, he couldn't make being black illegal. He couldn't make being a free thinker and anti-war illegal. So he found whatever way he could to make these groups.
Whatever those black free thinkers were doing, that was going to be illegal.
Yes, like that was it. And if it wasn't like the black free thinkers that were opposing it, if it was any other group, he would have just picked that. So, people have a right to explore their consciousness. This is their own mind. And these substances are non-toxic, and they're proven to be non-addictive. So this is clearly a total overreach of the government,
Yeah, totally. Oh, you're good, Zach.
Do you think that those same drugs that potentially led people to be incarcerated, and others obviously who weren't incarcerated because of the psychedelic drugs explicitly, but I think that because of the cognitive damage that is, people are put through when they have to endure long sentences in prison, or even short sentences in the American prison system, it leaves people with so much post-traumatic stress and depression and anxiety and all of these, mental health issues that they have to grapple with for the rest of their lives. Do you think that, psychedelic treatment would be an effective way of reducing recidivism?
Absolutely. I know that Brazil is doing, they have a program where they are trying to reform prisoners with ayahuasca. And I'm not sure what the data says, but and I think this is maybe like 2 years old, but they're having amazing results with people just understanding whatever they did wrong, like understanding the impacts of that and how that can affect recidivism, right? Like, I just think that locking somebody up in a room for, a mistake that they made and not providing any other wraparound services, and not even like allowing somebody when they do get out to even vote or, get a job that can pay for their life, like this is another way of like enslaving people to the system, right? You have these big corporations that are making money off of these prisons, and they need a constant feed of people in there so they can make money off of it. And it's very clear that that system will reach a tipping point at some point down the line, hopefully sooner rather than later. And I think that we're on the upward slope here with some criminal justice reform that's already happened. But it's going to reach a point where we've all got to take a pause and say, we're doing this all wrong. We're not treating people, and we're just enslaving them into this system. And it costs a lot of money. And when you do a cost benefit analysis to treat somebody for these issues, whatever issues it may be, it's always cheaper than putting them into the prison system.
Yeah. Well, I have another question for you. This is something that I'm kind of personally curious about, and also something that I feel that our society is just massively confused about. So the Decriminalize Nature D.C. initiative applies to plant-based entheogens, but not drugs like LSD or other synthesized compounds, which are, commonly associated with mushrooms and usually, kind of grouped in with as the same kind of drug by your average person. And I feel like there's just so much confusion out there about this, and for me a little bit too. Could you just explain the difference between entheogens and compounds such as LSD? And do you think the synthesized compounds, should people be aware of those? Do you not think they have medicinal potential in the same way, or do you think they do?
Well, I absolutely think they do. I think there is a place for them. I think for this approach, we were just focusing on naturally occurring medicines. I mean, anything that's synthesized can bring up issues with accessibility. And like we've seen how the cannabis movement has excluded certain groups of people, like there are still people in prison for very small cannabis offenses. So I think with just focusing on naturally occurring substances right now, you can alleviate a lot of accessibility issues with this kind of reform. And that doesn't like preclude us from actually like taking those next steps and saying, well, all drugs should be decriminalized, because I do think that's the next step that's going to happen after this. But it's just incremental policy. I think it's a much easier pill to swallow when you're talking about, well, this mushroom grows in a park down the street from you than you're talking about a tab of LSD,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to think about something like, we mentioned synthesized substances like MDMA has been popularized as a psychedelic therapy through things like MAPS, which is the medically assisted psychedelic, or MDMA assisted psychedelic therapy, I believe. And it's interesting to see how that was founded in 1986. And in just a few short years, I feel like the tide has churned so much. Do you think that part of that has to do with how people have started to get over the taboo surrounding marijuana, and that's kind of opened the doors for all these next steps to occur?
Absolutely. I think the cannabis movement has laid the groundwork for all of this. I think that we're all programmed to be totally okay with cigarettes and alcohol, but they are the most damaging substances that you could ingest if you're looking on a scale of like mushrooms to alcohol and tobacco, especially the way cigarettes are produced now with all sorts of additives in them. They're extremely harmful. And, I've gotten into discussions about this with people who, like, I had a nanny, my old nanny, like quit her job. Well, actually, I had to get rid of her, but like she caused so much turmoil in my house because she found out that we had cannabis in we had a little cabinet that had a little shelf that's where our cannabis was in our house, and she did not like it at all. And she, we went toe to toe with her. I'm like, this is a choice that me and my husband make. Like, we see that there's actually like a medical benefit to this. And, you know, when I get a headache, I'm not taking a Tylenol. I'm not taking anything else. I will like just smoke a little bit of cannabis and that's it. And, you know, she was totally okay with like the wall of alcohol I have in my house that's on full display, but is not okay with just a little bit of cannabis in a jar that's sitting on a shelf in a closed cupboard, you know? So it's undoing a lot of programming that we have been forced down our throats. And, you know, it's funny because we're totally okay with like drunk people walking down the street, you know, but oh my God, if somebody's tripping, like that's the worst thing for society ever. It's like, it's just for me, it's just such like a weird time to be having these discussions, because it's like somebody like falling all over the place drunk, like that's okay. You're okay with like throwing up and like, I don't know, having a hangover for the next day, but like a mushroom that grows naturally in nature.
Pile of cow shit.
Yeah, like that's your problem. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just strange. But, you know, like, again, like this is a generational thing. Like we've just been programmed to be okay with these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially because, you know, part of the reason we've been programmed is because they're so profitable, you know, for these companies. Alcohol, tobacco, it's no coincidence they're the two most common or accepted drugs. They're also the two most addictive, the two drugs that, you know, companies can get people addicted to and continue to profit off them for the rest of time. Just like these super addictive pharmaceuticals that we're seeing being used instead of natural medicines like cannabis, like psilocybin, non-addictive substances. My one last question to you is just, I wanted to hear or let you speak a little bit about how mushrooms and psilocybin has really, you know, personally helped you on your own struggles with depression or anxiety. You briefly mentioned that. Could you speak to the healing therapeutic effects of these drugs?
Yeah. So backstory, was pregnant with my second child. I had an incredibly painful, difficult pregnancy, and I had what you call antepartum depression. It's depression during your pregnancy. And I had a total meltdown during one of my just regular checkup appointments. And, the doctor just like was prescribing me antidepressants like immediately. Like the moment I started crying, she was like, well, here you go. And, you know, I had seen a couple of my friends deal with depression and them not finding the right medication and constantly be on this like, well, I'm on this and, you know, it's not working. So I need to taper off of this and we're going to try something else. And it never seemed like anything would work for them. So I was really hesitant to just go fill it and like start it up. And my doctor was like, you know, it's fine. Like you'll deliver the baby, you'll get off the medication, you'll be back to normal. So I did some research and I was shocked. I was really shocked. And this is to your previous point you just made, is that, you know, we are prescribing people antidepressants on a trial and error basis. And like, what kind of permanent damage is that having on their brains? And you can't correctly prescribe anybody an antidepressant until you do a full brain scan and like do all these other evaluations. But we don't do that because the insurance companies don't make money off of that, right? And then pharmaceuticals, like they don't make money off of that. Like they want you to be on this constant.
It's like the old Chris Rock bit. There's no money in cures. The money's in the medication.
Exactly. So I decided to go a more natural route and just try talk therapy, but I mean, nothing was working. I delivered the baby and he's healthy and happy, but like very quickly went into a downward spiral and I was like losing control of my life. Like my marriage was suffering. I was doing terrible at my job. I wasn't being a good parent. I wasn't really engaged with my kids. And I, you know, it got to a point where it was like, if I don't do something about this, I'm just going to take my own life. Like I'm dragging everyone through the mud with me. Like my marriage was like really on the rocks. And that's when I heard the Joe Rogan podcast and with Paul Stamets, and my mind was blown. And like I said, I never had any experience with psychedelics before this, but my husband, he grew up in the South, and they, you know, it was a regular thing for him and his friends to go to cow pasture and pick mushrooms. And, you know, that's that's just what they did. And he goes, this makes a lot of sense. Like, every time I would eat mushrooms with my friends, like I'd feel great for weeks after. So why don't we just try this? So I wasn't comfortable with doing like a full, what they call a hero dose, but
Yeah. What's that? 5 grams alone in the dark?
yeah. Well, I think Paul Stamets' first experience was like maybe 10 grams, but like a hero dose. But yeah, I was like not ready for that yet. So I was like, I'll just try microdosing. And within like 3 days, it was a drastic difference. Like I could get out of bed in the morning and I was like carrying my body differently. I was talking differently. I was interacting with my children more. And it was shocking because I hadn't felt halfway normal for a very long time. And I was amazed, but I was in possession of a Schedule I drug, and I have 2 little kids, and I'm a DC government employee, and I could have lost everything I had. So it was kind of like I would do it, and then I would stop doing it, and it started up again. It wasn't consistent enough for me to get like really true healing. And then coincidentally, a friend of mine, after I stopped microdosing, introduced me to an ayahuasca healer, and literally after a few sessions with him, I was transformed, and I was like, oh, we need to do something about this. I was watching the Decrim Denver campaign happening in real time. So I reached out to the campaign director there, Kevin Matthews, and I was just like, what does this look like? Like, do people think you're crazy? Like, do you guys have a chance of winning this? And, they won narrowly, but, he connected me to people in the drug reform world. And, I didn't know what this whole thing would look like. I never intended on being the face of a campaign like this. And I always just assumed like I'll support the campaign. I'll work in the background, but I don't need to be the face. And, by November of last year, I was approached, by David Bronner's people, and they were like, well, we want to do a campaign in DC. And I was like, cool. Like, I've been talking about doing a campaign in DC, like best of both worlds. Like, I bring experience with this, and then you guys have like all the activists and the money to fund a campaign like this. So this is the best of both worlds. And they were like, well, you should be the face of it. And it was one of those things where it's like, I don't think I can do that. Like, what would the moms at school say about me? Like, I was very concerned about like public perception. I'm not like an activist by trade. I mean, I have attended marches and stuff, but I've never been out there. I've never been arrested for anything. I'm like such a normal person. And, finally, it came down to the wire where we had to submit the paperwork for this so we could have enough time to get on the November general ballot in this fall. And they were like, we've got to submit this stuff tomorrow. Like, you have to make a decision. And I said no. And I laid in bed, like right after I sent that text saying, I can't do this. It's too risky. And I just like got really emotional. And I talked to my husband about it. And I was just like, I think I made the wrong decision here. People need to hear from people like me. When I was going through my issues, it was very isolating, and I felt like I had nobody to talk to, even though I had tons of people to talk. Like, I had friends who had babies around the exact same time as me. I had a supportive husband. Even my manager at work was covering for me. Like, she was sympathetic to me. Like, I had all the resources in the world to be okay. And I still felt like at any minute I could have lost my life. So I kept thinking of all the people who maybe don't have an understanding, supportive spouse, or, don't have a job that has like a great sick leave policy or a manager that would cover for them. I thought about everybody that goes through this stuff, and I just felt like I had to do this. And this message has to come from the most normal person ever to resonate with like normal people. Because, we are taking something so sensational that's really not sensational and bringing real life into it and providing like real results for people. And it's amazing that the outpouring of support that we've gotten, it tells me that a lot of people are really suffering and people need this kind of therapy.
Yeah, well, we really thank you for sharing your story and letting people know. I think that, like you said, you're just a normal person, but I think we need more of that. We need moms who come out and say that, we should decriminalize psychedelics, because when two 22-year-old guys like us say it, everybody's like, yeah, you guys just want to get like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, we
So
hear that all the time. Yeah. We're like, this
yeah,
is bullshit, you know? Like,
but
and I'm like,
it
no,
starts
it's
to
not.
change the stigma when somebody, like you, who has children, who, leads a responsible life, who has, done this, comes out and says it. And I think that you make a perfect vehicle. And I think it's really powerful that you've shared your story in the way that you have.
Yeah, I'm happy to serve the movement in this capacity. I think, just in this movement, there's been a lot of white males running the show, which is like, it's fine. But also, one lesson learned from the cannabis movement is that we need to be way more inclusive and boost up these other voices, because, they're experiencing trauma on a whole other level. So like I personally make it a point that our campaign's really diverse and inclusive, and, that this is for everyone.
Yeah, that's so important, especially because DC is a state with a high African American population, but still has no representation at the federal.
Yeah.
So
that was my last question for you, Melissa. Was recently the House of Representatives passed legislation that would have made DC the 51st state, whereas it stands right now, it's I'm not even sure how you would classify it, a colony. I don't know. But how would that impact your movement if the House and Senate, or the Senate flips and the House is retained, and the Democrats are able to pass legislation that would make DC the 51st state?
God, it opens so many doors. So we fully expect a blue wave in the Senate this fall, just with everything going on in our country right now, and how everything's so politicized. I do feel like people are kind of fed up with this and will vote the other party. And it's clear to me through conversations I've had with people in Senate that, this is a top priority for Congress, the Democrats in Congress. And as soon as they get control of the Senate, they're going to make DC the 51st state. What really hinders us the most right now, and what really drove the language in our initiative, was this Andy Harris. I'm not sure if you heard about him. He tried to pass an amendment in the last appropriations that the House just negotiated last week. And he tried to stop this initiative from moving forward. He had no support from the Democrats, and, I'm not sure what the language said exactly, but there was no path forward for him to kind of implement any of this, and everyone kind of acknowledged that. But the Harris, he had a rider on our budget, and he put it on there in 2014 to prevent DC from fully regulating our cannabis market here. So he essentially said, you cannot change any laws or penalties that involve Schedule I drugs. So what happened is, cannabis is legal for home cultivation and gift exchange, but you can't technically go to a store and sell it. So the market has responded, and you can walk into a head shop and buy a pair of socks and get a free gift of cannabis. So there's an entire gray market out there, and DC's not collecting the revenue from it or doing anything beneficial with this, because we have this crazy provision on us. So as soon as this provision is lifted, which for me personally, that's more of a priority than even statehood. Like, statehood's going to come, and that's going to take a little while to implement. It'll take a few years. But like this Harris amendment and these overreaches like that Congress has put on DC, that's what really is hindering our local policy here. And as soon as that's lifted from us, we can take that next step and fully regulate our cannabis market, and then put in some real regulatory reforms around psychedelics. So I'm really excited for November, not only because my initiative will get voted on, but I'm excited to see what happens across the country. I think it's time. Like, we're ready for it. AOC has already proposed 2 different bills that both got voted down, but, like, that's the strategy. You introduce something controversial, you're educating the other members on the subject matter, and, hopefully I don't know who will introduce the next one. maybe it would be our new majority leader, Chuck Schumer, come November. But, I do think that we are getting to a point now where like the science is there and it's going to be hard to deny it, and also our neighbors up north, Canada, are so progressive on these policies, and, they are moving forward with lightning speed, it seems like. So it'll definitely reach that tipping point.
Yeah, just want to say thanks so much for talking to us. And people can vote on your ballot initiative this November. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we're just waiting to be certified by the Board of Elections. All of our signatures were submitted on July 6th, and we submitted like over 36,000 signatures, and the minimum requirement was a little under 25,000. So we're confident we have enough signatures to be officially on the ballot, but the official announcement might not come for another 2 weeks. But we've done our legwork, and we know we have enough signatures. So we're transitioning into a more educational part of the campaign, and then this fall we will be doing a lot of get out the vote. It's a really exciting time to be in DC. I think a win in the psychedelic world in DC will be really symbolic for the rest of the country. So far it's only Denver, Oakland, and Santa Cruz that have passed reforms like this. And, personally, when I hear about that, it's like, yeah, well, that, of course, like the West Coast views these subjects very differently than the East Coast. They're much more open about usage of psychedelics. But, DC is more of a hybrid type place. And I think that we can be a real leader for places like Memphis, Tennessee, or Orlando, Florida, or Charleston, South Carolina. I think that culturally we're about to break a lot of barriers.
Yeah, let's bring on the psychedelic revolution.
Melissa Lavasani, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.